What are margins? Well, if you've ever happened to tune in to Shark Tank, and being the clever business people they are, those sharks realize that if you understand the margins, you can better understand the business and how much money you're going to make in the long run. Generally speaking, on the show, when they ask about the margins of a product, they're really specifically referring to gross margins. Gross margins are simply revenue less cost of goods. This basically means that for each unit of a specific product, what is your cost per unit and how much can you sell it for? And gross margins represent that as a percentage. Let's say you're the proud owner of Acme Pencil Company, and it turns out that your cost to make one pencil is about 90 cents. Okay. Let's say you're able to sell those pencils for $1 each. This means each pencil you sell before any overhead, etc., you're making 10 cents expressed as a percentage. Your gross margin is 10%. Seems pretty simple, right? And that's all gross margin really is. The cost per unit and the difference between that and how much you can sell it for expressed as a percentage. But what happens if, say, a very mean man shows up and he wants to make his own pencil company and he decides, you know what, I can do better. And he makes each pencil for, say, 50 cents. That would mean competitor pencil company B, we'll call it, they can make each pencil for 50 cents. And if they sell at the same price as you for $1, that makes their gross margin 50%. But wait, what happens if they decide to cut their price and sell it for 75 cents instead? It costs you 90 cents to make your pencils. There's no way you could compete with that. They're going to march right into your house. It's going to be a disaster for your business. And that's right. In simpler terms, they will drink your milkshake. Now, even though it's bad to have your milkshake drank, gross margins are not everything. They don't include other overall costs of the business, such as SG&A, that's selling, general, and admin, things like interest on any debt in the company, etc. So it's by no means an all-inclusive, all-comprehensive picture of your business. It's a pretty high-level metric that just gives you a little bit of an idea of perhaps the flexibility of the business in the event that they need to compete on something like price. But what else is there to take into consideration? How do you measure those other factors? Well, one of the other measures we have is operating margin. Operating margin will account for all of the other actual operational costs needed to run the business. Do you have an accounting department, a legal department, receptionist out front? How about that fancy old private jet that the CEO flies around in? Pretty much all of that kind of thing gets accounted for in the operating margin. Basically, how much money does the business bring in after you pay those operating costs? It still does not count for things like interest or depreciation. When evaluating a business based on its margins, you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. You don't want to necessarily compare a business to other businesses that aren't in a similar industry. For example, if you tried to compare Microsoft with Disney, well, it wouldn't really work because shareholders of Microsoft, if their operating margin, for example, went down to 25%, they would probably be pretty unhappy and they would probably want to start selling. Whereas if Disney's operating margins went up to 25%, investors would be absolutely thrilled with that fact. Before we get to the bottom line, I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, help us grow the audience, and make sure that you give us a big ol' resounding thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. Really means a lot. The bottom line is net profit margins. This is what's left after every expense, including non operational expenses like interest and depreciation. This is the number that tells you how much of every additional dollar of revenue, if everything else stays equal, will turn into actual profits. And when it comes to that, consistency is key. Look at the changes from right to left. Further in the past is to the right. Most recent year is on the left for Walmart. Look at their operating margin. Just going from 5.59% down to 3.34% took their actual net profit margin from 3.3 down to 1.9%. Just a drop of 3% down to 2% in terms of profit margin is actually a 30% decrease in net income if revenue stayed constant. That would be a tremendous blow to almost any business. And with a company like Walmart, that 1% difference could be billions of dollars. So let's recap a little bit about what we've learned today about margins and the story they can tell you about a business. High gross margins might indicate a certain amount of flexibility, ability to compete on price, in some cases, even a high moat if other companies can't replicate the same product or service. Operating margins being consistent over time, I think shows potentially a strong management team. A management team that's good at keeping costs under control, that doesn't indulge in a lot of wasteful spending and a lot of fluff. Good stewardship goes a long way. And remember, as long as these things stay consistent, every additional dollar of revenue will translate into more growing profits. And remember, as always, cash flow is king.